I met with a recruiter who basically said, "You're washed up. You're over." Once I started the RealReal, in my head, I'm like, okay, if it fails, it fails. A no isn't always a no.
Selling on the RealReal, it's like seamless.
By design, by the way. We wanted to take away all the work so you could just make money. The beauty of the RealReal is the product on that site is exclusive. You will not find it anywhere else.
So, Julie, I want to start with the idea that women, unfortunately, are kind of like told this myth, okay, that they're late or behind in life. And you started the RealReal in your 50s, which is incredibly inspiring considering it is such a successful business and you've had like quite the career. So, how did you not subscribe to this idea that, women are behind or too late?
Well, all right, I was 52 when I started it. Look, I had a long career
Uh-huh.
in tech, and I met with a recruiter who basically said, "You're washed up. You're over."
You're kidding.
No, it was after Pets.com had failed, and he said, "You really haven't. That was a big failure, and you really haven't done anything after that. So just so you know, you're never going to be offered another good job because I was I was a CEO to hire, and I had great jobs, and it all stopped once I had a big failure with Pets.com. So once he told me that, and I was 50, 51, I think, then I had a big decision to make. I could either start my own business, or my plan B, which was the worst thing I could think of, which is for put my house on the market because I had a house,
Mhm.
um, and move to Arizona. And I know there's probably a lot of people that love yoga, but I think of it as a cult. And Arizona has a lot of snakes, so that was my thing. Like I hate snakes, so move to a place that had snakes, that had way too much heat, and figure out how to teach yoga, which I never would have done. So I kept thinking that's my plan B,
Oh my
but it
gosh.
really was my back was against the wall because prior to that, I'd had a divorce, and when you get a divorce, especially in the state of California, you start out with 100%, you have
Uh-huh.
50% left, and then I'd had a failure in my career, and I was always the money earner. So it became like, all right, what am I going to do? And I had 2 years of cash left,
Uh-huh.
and I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to start my own business. I know I want to go back into e-commerce, and and my first thing I thought I should do is understand what Amazon could do and couldn't do. And I mapped it out, and then and I had luxury as one of the things they're never going to be able to do, but then I had no ideas. All right? So I really sort of my back was against the wall. So I wouldn't say I never thought about my age. How's that? It never came into consideration. Now I'd had a lot of experience up
Mhm.
until then. And what I had to do, though, is recognize, which was a journey, and ultimately it was a good journey, but it's always painful, that regardless of what this person or maybe other people thought of me, I knew myself better than anyone else. And it didn't matter what that person said. It did on one level, because he was never going to recommend me for a good job. He was a top recruiter. But that didn't mean I wasn't the most talented person in the room and I couldn't do something. So and also, by the way, in tech, when you're a woman over 50, you're sort of dead, to be honest. It's not really it's very hard to have a career as a female in the technical world. And if you have a failure and you're a woman, it's very, very hard to come back.
That's really crazy because for me, I feel like failure is just an opportunity to learn and get better.
And you are absolutely right. And that is, I mean, I agree completely, but
Uh-huh.
that may not be how the world looks at it. And Pets.com was a very public failure. And it was used as the .com bust emblem, the puppet, our little icon, the Pets.com puppet. So I had this phenomenally negative press.
Mhm.
And, every world you're in, whether it's your business or in my case, the tech world, small world.
Mhm.
And they're
Mhm.
like, well, why do we want to bring a failure in? Why don't we bring someone in who's never failed?
So then when you went through this, what did you want to apply from the failure that you had? And I'm going to put it in air quotes failure because I really do believe that every failure is an opportunity to learn. So what did you believe that you could kind of change as you started this new business of yours?
I didn't look. Um, Pets.com, I had to shut it down because the funding dried up. So
Right.
it wasn't about the internal business at
Uh-huh.
all. It's just funding dried up. It's pretty notorious. It was 25 years ago. It was called
Mhm.
the dot-com bust. Over 1,000 other companies went out of business. So it was more about I know how to create a really great e-commerce
Yeah.
business. I know what excellent looks like because
Mhm.
I'd been a serial CEO and had other exits that were positive. And it was more about not letting that failure define me,
Totally.
even though maybe other people were.
Mhm.
And something that I didn't know until I didn't realize this. Once I started the Real Rail, and we can talk about how I got the inspiration for it, but
Mhm.
once I started it, in my head, I'm like, okay, if it fails, it fails. So for some reason,
It made you
this
more fearless.
completely
I
fearless.
love
So
that.
it took away, I guess, because Pets.com was so public
Uh-huh.
and I'd lived through it, that I'm like, okay, if it fails, it fails. I'll figure something else out. And it totally stripped away any fear I had of failure, which was a gift that I had no idea. I was like, it happened. It wasn't something I was concentrating on. It's something that I'm like, oh, that's cool. Because it was like I sort of had my own revelation when I recognized that in myself. I'm like, I have no fear of failure in this
Well,
business.
I mean, it's like you're saying it like you're so right because it is kind of a gift because so many founders when they start a business, oftentimes that fear is like
It's
they're
what stops them.
exactly.
Right.
And so once you experience that, you're like, okay, well, I've done it once.
Right.
If I
Right.
have to, I'll do it again. And so
Right.
I think it just makes you kind of, I guess, go for it a little bit more. It also builds relentlessness.
It does, it does. I mean, look, up until then, I was the CEO of a company, Berkeley Systems, that had a successful well, I never by the way, I did not start that company.
Hmm.
So the companies I'm talking to you about, I didn't start. But I was successful at an early stage tech company. I was the CEO of Berkeley Systems, and I turned that company around. It had a successful exit. I was the CEO of a company called Real.com, REEL.com, the first site to sell movies, and I got the revenue up. That had a successful outcome. I was brought in as the CEO of Pets.com, and that I had to shut down. It was considered a big failure.
Hmm.
So I had like success, and then it was like a big crash, and that that I didn't even, to be honest, even when I was shutting down Pets, I didn't take into account the magnitude of the negative press that would happen, and that in the tech world it would be considered a monumental failure because, like I said, there were over 1,000 companies that also shut down, including one that had lost $1.1 billion called Webvan
Wow.
of their investors' money. And all of these companies that were shut down, including Pets, was actually the precursor. So Pets.com was, the first Chewy.com,
Uh-huh.
which is alive and well. And Webvan was the precursor to Instacart and DoorDash.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when you think about the companies, that it really was a timing issue,
Totally.
but no one had that perspective then. They're just like, look at these crazy tech people. It was a great boom and now it's a bust.
Well, I also think that there is this epidemic of people kind of building people up and taking like
Oh,
joy in bringing
absolutely.
them down. It's almost like feeds their like it's like I don't know, it's just this like ugly thing that people do.
It is. It really was ugly. And so Pets became the poster child for all the .com companies.
That's insane.
And even, it's still alive. Gave a press interview about 2 months ago because it was the anniversary of the .com bust,
Mhm.
and it was someone from Bloomberg, and he said, "Well, what did we get wrong?" And I
Mhm.
said, "Well, you got wrong that what we did was the future, and all you guys were focused on was the immediate day,
Yeah,
and you totally missed that everything that happened then was a precursor to what's been thriving now."
totally.
So
Totally.
so anyway, so that happened. So I would say my age never came into it. Now, I'm lucky, I'm healthy, I have a lot of energy.
You have so much energy. Oh
I
my gosh.
I know
Oh
I
my
do.
gosh. You're
Still,
like
still.
same energy levels as me, if not more. It's
So I
incredible.
have a lot of energy, and also I knew I could do it,
Totally.
but my age never came into it.
I love that, and I think it's so important for other women to hear that because I think that it doesn't even matter your age. I feel like everyone worries that they're behind. Like, oh, you've not done it by you're not a billionaire by 25 or whatever these like unrealistic standards you set for yourself. We put so much pressure on
I
ourselves being like, I'm
know.
behind, I'm behind. And this is, I mean, that's why I wanted to bring this up because you started your company in your 50s and people are like, oh, I didn't start it at 19 while I was in college. Damn, like too late for me.
But I have to say there's a couple of things. One is I was in companies I kept learning
Mhm.
from. But also I do think women and I fall into this and I know a lot of women. I kept feeling that I wasn't ready to start my own company because I had so much
Mm,
more to learn.
right.
So that's um part of that I'm sure was fear-based.
Yeah,
Part of it's I'm a pragmatic person and I was also doing really it was I was doing really cool things in these other companies. But, watching from a sitting around a venture capital table, which I did for a while, and watching the pitches, I guarantee you no man thinks that they don't have enough experience to start a company.
for
And so
sure.
it is something I think more in the female psyche that we're like, I have still have more to learn. And I'm sure there's a societal impact that's invisible, that's negative. But I also think it's our own fear.
Mhm, mhm.
So like I said, when my back was against the wall, I'm like, I got to figure this out and I can do it.
So then what was the inspiration behind the Real? And what's really funny as you're walking me through this is no one in my age bracket, I don't think, remembers this pets.com failure, but we all know the Real and love the
Yay,
Real
that's
Real.
great,
So,
that's
yeah,
great. I think it has 38 million members now.
it's incredible. I'm one of them.
Good. So the first thing I did was map out and do a framework of what Amazon could do and couldn't do.
Mm,
Because Amazon, so I started the business in 20, well, I came up with the idea in 2010. We opened the doors and the virtual doors in 2011.
mhm,
But in 2010, it was clear that Amazon won in e-commerce. So it was like, what can they do versus what can they not do? Luxury was one of those things. I knew they'd never do luxury. Now, having said that, I also, in my head, I'm like, well, I'm not going to do my own luxury brand. So I sort of put that as a negative. And I had other areas and I explored them. So in August was when the recruiter basically said, you're done. You
mhm.
better figure something out. It's now November. And I've explored other areas. I still have no idea, but I wasn't panicked, which only had 2 years of cash, so I should
Mhm.
have started to have a little panic, and I'm shopping with a girlfriend. We went into a beautiful boutique outside of Palo Alto, and she knew the owner. Full price boutique, had a little bit of consignment in the back, and that's where my girlfriend shopped. And she's a multimillionaire. So when we got out, I'm like, "What just happened? You just bought used things." And she said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. I bought Prada, I bought Gucci, I bought Louis Vuitton, and I got a great deal. Who cares if someone else owned them?" And I'm like, "Well, how do you know they're authentic?" She goes, "I trust the owner. She knows exactly who gave this to her." I'm like, "Okay." And I said, "Would you ever shop on eBay?" She said, "No, too many fakes." So, "Would you ever consign or go into a consignment store?" She goes, "I've never consigned. I'd never walk into a consignment store. They're too gross." So, but I said, "But you would buy consigned goods in a beautiful location." And they were, by the way, I should say they were beautifully merchandised.
Totally. I mean, so many are now. I mean, your shop on Melrose.
I know. Well, but we set the standards. And
Mhm.
I'm like, and all of a sudden, remember I had the luxury quadrant that Amazon couldn't do? I'm like, I knew it. I'm like, that's it. I knew that was it right then. So I went home that night, researched the luxury market, looked at how eBay was doing it, looked at my own closet to say, what do I have to consign? Do I have, because she said it's too hard to consign. I would never do it. I hadn't even considered consigning. I had 60 things that I pulled out. I'm like, I could sell these on and I'm like, then I researched the size and I sketched out the entire business that night, including I knew I needed a service where people came to your house. I knew I needed to authenticate all the goods, so we'd have to be experts in authentication. I knew we would have to take possession of the goods. We'd have to set the price because no one, the marketplace, especially I had this vision for it getting much, much larger. The marketplace is smarter than the individual. So so an individual can't set their price because they don't have full knowledge, but the marketplace has full knowledge. So we'd have to set the price. And then I started, and also in looking at, I tried all these different things. I write about the pawn shop experience in general in the book because it was so gross.
Mhm.
And I thought, okay, we're going to do jewelry. We can do better than anything that's out there because I had
Mhm.
consigned in a brick and mortar store. Not, I mean, it can be fine, but the truth is, the internet opens you up to millions of
Totally. I mean,
buyers.
you're
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 not landlocked. And by the way, what we'll talk about when the RealReal opened their first store, Melrose was the second store.
Mm.
So all of these things I sketched out right away, and then I knew that I needed a merchant. All right. So I needed a merchant because I'm not, and I needed someone who really understood fashion
Mhm.
because that's not my skill set. My skill set's more technical, more e commerce, marketing, yes, but not that. And I started recruiting from my first merchant, who I found a woman named Sahi, who's now Rate Levesque. She's been married, and she was running her own brick and mortar store in San Francisco, and she had won awards for her merchandising, and she was very progressive, but she also had a little consignment in the back.
Mhm.
We met, and I said, "You ready to shut down your store?" And she said she was at a very pivotal point. She was like, "Well, either I have to have more stores
Mhm.
to make really a big business,
Mhm.
or I have to shut it down and join you." So she decided to shut that store down and join me as my first employee.
So then what do you do from there? Because as you said, there's so many different things to this, it's authenticating, it's even getting people to give you their
All right, so this was the big challenge. You nailed it right there because they'd never seen a service like this
Mhm.
where people come to your house and pick up. So here's what I knew. I'd already made a decision because I had limited capital when I got started, which you always do when you get started,
Totally.
and unless you're a guy who's Andreessen Horowitz, like who embraces.
Yeah.
But I like the WeWork guy, got a
Mhm.
lot of money even though he failed. But women tend not to, and most entrepreneurs tend not to. It's not really a gender thing. So I thought, okay, my top priority is supply. If I
Mm.
get the top product in, I'm not going to worry about demand. And since I have limited money, I'm going to work off of a technology platform to get started, even though I have to take it over. So then it became, well, how do I get supply? So the first thing was you call up all your friends. And then when Rati joined, she called up all of her friends. Well, that only gets you so far.
Mhm.
So then I developed a stylist program. So now, oh, wait. So now we're in April, May. All
Mhm.
right. And I'm leased a tiny, tiny warehouse in a dodgy area in Marin, very dodgy. Like you didn't wanna come in too early because
Mhm.
there was activity
Oh
going
my
on,
god.
and you didn't wanna leave too late, all
Mhm.
right? But during the day, it was fine. So I had leased a warehouse, and we had skewed all the product and authenticated it, so and I called in friends, called up experts, so we'd done all of that. But we didn't have enough product in, so I thought, I'm gonna start working with stylists, and I'm gonna offer them an incentive to give us the product. So I was flying down to LA. I mean, you honestly, it was one of the funniest scenes ever. So you have to think first it started in my house. We set up a
Mhm.
photography studio in the house. And then my anyway, at that point I was living with someone. At some point he's like, I surrender. I got to get out of here because he couldn't take it anymore because the house was, a lot of
Yep.
activity going on. Everything was happening in the house. Then we moved to the warehouse, and the original photographer's like, that's too far for me to drive. It was like 5 miles. But he's like, I'm not doing. Plus, we weren't paying him
Yeah.
very much,
Yeah.
and so then with the photographer station, then was so small that we had to open the bathroom door to get the right perspective
Oh
on
my
the
god.
models. So he was always stepping into the bathroom. It was a railroad type, like there
Uh-huh.
was a little room, then the photography, then a little area where we set up an accountant and for shoes and handbags, then like a proper warehouse, but it
Mhm.
with a little loft with a door that opened, a warehouse door, but it was all gross. Anyway, so we got all this product, and had a great stylist program. I'm like, no, this is gonna work. It's gonna work. Heard nothing back. And I'd talked to them. I'd flown down. I met with stylists. I was networking to meet with, why stylists? They're great aggregators of
Mhm.
products. So remember, I have to solve for supply. That was my whole thing. And but we had enough product to launch, and we launched on I think around June 10th. close to June 10th of 2011. It sold out all immediately within the first 30 minutes.
Who were all the
Eh,
customers?
I mean, we had a little bit of local press, but
Uh-huh.
it was, and we only had like maybe a sale of 60 items gone, seconds gone.
Oh my gosh.
I know, but then we're like, we only had enough for like a few more sales, right? Because we had no product coming in. Then I get a call from, so I'm like, that stylist program isn't working. And we
Mhm.
did direct mail. Anyway, we get this call and it was like, can you be in LA tomorrow?
Mhm.
Because my client wants to clean out her warehouse. And of course, everyone has my cell phone number because we don't have an office phone.
Totally, yeah.
I'm like, a warehouse? Yes, you're going to need a U-Haul. Can you be there? And I'm like, so in the meantime, I'm writing Rati notes. It's just Rati and I and anyone we can harness in. We're not paying anyone else.
Yeah.
I'm writing her notes. Warehouse. This is going to be a warehouse. LA, can you go? I'm writing her. She's like, I'll go. I'll go. We had an intern working with us. So sure enough, she and the intern get on the plane the next morning early. They rent a U-Haul. And by the way, and if Rati ever hears this, she's going to be sort of mad at me. But in my opinion, she is not a good driver. So then her driving, her driving that U-Haul, it was a little scary. And she's like, I mean, she's just not. If you saw her original car,
Yeah.
which I saw before she upgraded her car, it had dents on it everywhere. So maybe she's not a good parker, but all I know is I've never seen a car that beaten up. Anyway, so she's down here with, and I'm like, is it really a warehouse? She goes, oh, it's a warehouse. And so then the client, who you would know if I named her name, but I can't tell. It was a private sale, but she wanted to try on everything one more time. I mean, and it was like over 800 things, right? It was
You're kidding.
No, it was a huge haul.
And so wait, who was this? Like, was she just like
She's a well-known actress.
Oh,
All right,
and
who
she
had
had
a warehouse.
wait,
A
that's
warehouse.
insane.
It is insane. So, all right. So then I'm like, oh, she wants to try it on. Well, then we have to, like, she goes, yeah, we have to spend the night because it's going to be a 2-day thing.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, okay. So then I had to find a hotel. It was one of those times where LA was sold out. I put him down in Terranea. You know, they had to drive. It was the only hotel I could find.
Oh my
Plus, remember, we're kind of broke. And
Yeah,
that's kind of
yeah.
an expensive
Yeah,
hotel.
that's a nice hotel,
It's
yeah.
a really nice hotel. So they show up with like, you know, down there. And then, we had an intern. We had an 18-year-old person. I had to call her mom and say, I'm sorry. Do you mind if she spends the night in LA? I got her a hotel room. It'll be fine, but this is taking a lot longer. She's like, okay. You know, you have to
Oh
call her mom.
my God.
And then the guy who eventually we ended up breaking up, but was, you know, I was sort of pushing him out of my house with the company.
Yeah.
I asked him if he would fly down and drive the truck back because I knew there was absolutely no way that these guys could drive that back. I mean,
Yeah.
they could barely drive it up here in the hills. It was in the Hollywood Hills. So he agreed to do that. And I said, also, could you buy some deodorant and toothbrush and toothpaste for them? Because I'm not sure they had a chance to get it. So sure enough, he goes down there. He has his own room. They have their room. And the next day, I couldn't get him on the phone, which pissed me off.
Mhm.
They're like, I'm like, I hope it's working. You know, I kept texting. Is it working?
Yeah,
What's going
oh my
on?
gosh.
It's happening. And occasionally I'd get like a text, we're good, we're working, leave us alone. You know, in the meantime, I'm there skewing product, answering the phone, whatever. They pull up outside the warehouse. They go, look, it's not as much as you, like, fine, she's out, it's not as much as you have. Well, they totally pimped me over. It was
Mhm.
like probably 1,400 items at the end of the day. And this person was so tiny. She was so tiny, but she had average size feet and handbags and belts. It was like a big cleanse. I think she wore a size 0,
Wow. Uh-huh.
but it was all designer. And that one pickup
Uh-huh.
got us through the summer. And then that stylist told another stylist. Then we started getting stylist referrals. And then I had enough business in LA. I'm like, I have to hire someone in LA. So then we made our first, but all of that from that, I was like, oh no, we have to focus on supply and we're going to go to aggregators and I know it'll work. And then it wasn't working and then it worked.
So then at what point then do you have to raise money or do you have to raise money at all?
I'll tell you the quick story.
Uh-huh.
yes, I needed to raise money, and I raised a little bit from friends and family. You're always raising
Yeah,
money. And, um, but I knew because of pets.com, remember every industry is small, and pets.com, I knew a VC wouldn't give me money till I had real business and I had
totally,
all
yeah.
the metrics worked out. So, and I also knew I was onto something because every time we put a sale up, sell out, sell out. So even those little size zero, turns out there's a lot of people that were size
Totally, yeah.
zero. And anyway, so the first thing was I needed to raise enough money for the first year. There was this cool new site up at the time. So I think it's 2011 called Angel List. And it
Yeah,
was,
I know Angel List,
all
yeah.
right. Well, so I was all excited and I sent, you had to get approved.
Uh-huh.
And the founders came back from Angel List. They're like, now this business will never fly. Our investors aren't interested. I'm like, what? They're like, nope, no one cares about this.
You're
No,
kidding.
they didn't even, I said, don't you going to test it? They're like, no, we're not testing it. So then I thought, you know what? They're wrong. And so then I went
Yeah.
to a friend. I know, but they blocked it. So then I went to a friend and I said, named Peter. I go, Peter, how do I get on Angel List? He goes, you need to get this guy, Dave McClure, who, by the way, was a person I had hired as a consultant in engineering when I was at Real.com. Now Dave McClure was running a VC fund. If Dave called 500 startups, if Dave invests, he's really good friends with the guys that own it, and then he'll tell them to get you on the platform. I'm like, okay. I said, do you think Dave remembers me from as this? He goes, oh, he remembers you because I mean, he was a contract engineer. He wasn't, Dave
Mhm.
McClure, the CEO of 500 startups. So then I reach out to Dave and he's like, yeah, well, then no problem. I'll invest 25K. And I'm like, okay, well, here's our deck. Here's our pitch. If you have any questions, and then he's like, "Yeah, but I can't get to it now." And I'm like, "Oh, no." This went on for 4.5 months. I'm chasing Dave. He's like, "I'm here. I'm there. I haven't had a chance." And I'm like, and then I would go back to Peter. "Peter, please tell Dave to look at the pitch. It's 25K." Anyway, finally he did, but it took about 4.5 months.
Oh
I
my
think
god.
in the meantime, I'm like getting 25K at a time from wherever I can get it from people. And Dave did invest. He did tell the guys we got on the platform. By the end of the year, we had raised 1.5 million.
Oh my god, amazing.
So but it was sort of like, first of all, when and entrepreneurs know this, a no isn't always a no.
Always,
You've
yeah.
got to figure out a way around those no's because you get too many no's. Um, we also got exposure to early stage venture capitalists on that. So then about a year, so now it's now May of 2012. We're at $10 million in sales. I'm like, it's time to go and raise capital. I still have this rag tab. I mean, Rachi's was great, but I'm still had like I think maybe 2 employees,
Yeah.
one who I wanted to talk out of leaving her permanent job
Uh-huh.
because I couldn't. I'm like, "No, you have such a good job. I
Yeah.
can't pay you anything." But anyway, her name was Maria. She said, "No, no, no, I really wanna work here." I'm like, "Oh my god, you're nuts." Um, but basically, not a lot of people working. It's still basically a few hourly people
Yeah.
and then, maybe 3 or 4 of us, and we're so tired because to do 0 to 10 million was harder than you think. But I need to raise capital, so I'm going out to the VCs. Because we got on that platform, an early stage VC named now they're called Headline. They were called eVenture then, they changed their name. Anyway, they had put money in about another in fact, he was the only venture capitalist that actually made his way because we were still in that same
Mhm.
warehouse that was dodgy.
Yeah.
So he made his way to investigate were we real. He saw all the product coming in because the stylist program was working. We had a person in LA and we were doing all the pickups in the Bay Area. So he shows up and he gives us another $1 million but not more. It might have been even 800K, but it didn't matter. It was
Yeah.
like a sign that a venture capitalist. So I go to his name was Matthias Schilling. I go to Matthias like I need to raise a real round. So he gave us seed money. And he's like, "Okay, I'll give you some warm introductions." Um, and that's what started us. So then I started raising capital, but honestly, it was only women that got it,
Of course. I mean, it
but
just
only women. Now he's a European guy, so
Uh-huh.
he
So he
got it.
understands,
He
yeah.
understands fashion. He
Yeah.
understands luxury. All the brands are there.
Uh-huh.
But we knocked on so many doors, got so many no's. And I knock on a door at Canaan
Mhm.
Ventures, and Canaan Maha Ibrahim was there, and she's like, "This is awesome." Because before then, every guy would be like, "I have to talk to my wife," right? I was like, or they'd say, "eBay's fine. We don't get it." And one
Mhm.
guy literally put his shoe on the table and said, "See this shoe? I've had this shoe for 5 years. Your business is never going to work." And it was a crappy old shoe
Oh my
anyway.
god, they just don't understand how women shop.
Or, plus the tech world is not known for luxury.
Totally,
They're
yeah.
known for high-end tech things,
Yeah,
but they're
yeah.
not exactly
Uh-uh.
the luxury consumer. So, when he put that, he's like, "What do you think of that?" When he did the shoe on the table, I go, "I think you're not my customer." I mean,
Yeah.
I almost burst out laughing. Now, what a that honestly, that was an asshole thing to
Yeah,
do.
that's crazy.
But Maha Ibrahim, a woman at Canaan, said, "You know what? This is awesome. Can you come in and present to my team?" I'm like, "Absolutely." So we come in, and again, it's Rati and I. And by this time, Peter had joined the company as our tech guy.
Mhm.
So there's three of us. We're going through the business, tell him how we got to 10 million, tell him about the stylist program. And one of her partners said, "You know, this is really interesting, but my wife would never let anyone in our house to do this." And I'm like, "We were there yesterday and we picked up a whole bunch of things." He goes, "What?"
You're kidding.
No, and it was honest. We had been there the day before.
Oh my, that's
Isn't
iconic.
that? It was sort of one of those perfect moments. So once Maha invested and she was the lead, then Headline came in and Graycroft came in,
Very
who's a
cool.
local LA venture firm. And those were my three big investors. Now, then we raised 10 million. Now, here's the thing, which I think is fascinating. And I've seen this over and over again. So once I had that idea and I knew it was going to happen for the Real Rail, I thought, okay, there's going to be other resale. It's like you're uh, plugging into the collective unconscious on
Mhm.
some level. And sure enough, three other companies were founded right away in the resale space. One of them was Poshmark. One of them was a company called Threadflip,
Mhm.
and one of them was ThreadUp. And so when I was out raising, we're all out raising capital the
Mm.
exact same time. And it was fascinating. And we were Threadflip was saying they were going high end, but they really didn't have any service and they didn't really have authentication. They had a mixed model where, like, if you sent it in to them, they would take a picture and post it,
Uh-huh.
but they wanted you to self-post, and Poshmark is still around, so you know what Poshmark
But
is.
Poshmark isn't luxury, are
No,
they?
no, so we
They're
were all
not,
going
yeah.
different ways.
Right.
Threadflip could have gone the direction we were going because
Uh-huh.
they were positioning themselves as a high end, but they didn't meet the high end criteria,
Right, right.
and, ThreadUp was really low end,
Yeah,
but we're still all out raising money,
totally.
and it's a small world to raise money in, and so that created even more drama because Poshmark people started trash talking the Real Real. I'm like, "We don't even know you guys. We're not even competing."
Oh my god. Okay, so when that starts to happen,
Right.
right? And, like, I mean, I'm sure that this is just one example of, like, just things that happen in business where you're
Yes.
like, "What the hell is going on?" How do you even deal with that emotionally?
Emotionally, well, first of all, you're pissed off because it's unnecessary because their
Totally.
model wasn't like my model. Their
Yeah.
focus wasn't my focus.
Uh-huh.
So it was unnecessary. I wouldn't have known if one of my venture capital people didn't get a call and say, "This Poshmark's out trash talking the Real Real." And so I'm like, well, I mean, you can't do anything about it.
Mhm.
But we were seated, about 3 years later at a table next to each other at a business of fashion event, and I'm like, "I'm not sitting next to those guys." And I'm like, "Why would you think I would want to sit next to them?"
Yeah, that's
So I just got up and moved. I moved
yeah.
all the place tags and moved because, I mean, first of all, it's unnecessary.
Totally.
And, the truth is raising capital is hard for everyone. But if someone was investing in their model and they thought their model was right and a defensive moat, they aren't going to think my model's right. There's no point in doing that at all.
That's the thing, like, my entire thing in business has been, like, I don't need to worry about what someone else is doing, like, I'll just do my thing and do it the best that I possibly can, and that product will speak for itself.
Product always wins. Product is always king. Now, having said that, you do have to have a competitive
Of
entry.
course, yeah.
Yeah, but quality product is always king. And that doesn't mean, I mean, look, you're talking, if you're out raising capital, the people giving you capital know what has come before you.
Yeah.
They're not visionaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't have an affinity with one of the partners, they'll never get it, which is why it was always hard. I think Poshmark, I think they raised at better rates than I did. I can tell you that Threadflip, can I tell you a little thread?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One of the VCs was a woman that looked at the RealReal early on, and we had several meetings. I call her in the book the coffee store VC. We kept meeting at a coffee shop. And she was like, oh, this is great. Tell me more. Send me your plan. Tell me how your economics work. Well, turns out she was doing that because she had already made a commitment to invest in this other startup called Threadflip.
And so she was passing it on to them, or?
Well, who knows? And by the way, not illegal.
Yeah, I mean, you can.
Yeah,
So
not
it's
illegal because, I should have asked. It never occurred to me to
Mhm.
ask, are you looking at other competing deals? But it wasn't illegal, but it's really sleazy. So that happened. But you know what? Threadflip went out of business. So there you go. And I have a theory on why they went out of business. May be wrong because I wasn't running that company. My
Mhm.
theory is they didn't focus on supply and the right thing, which is what
Mm.
I kept thinking, because you said it, product is king. If we get in the best product possible and we keep standards up and we really figure out authentication across multiple lines, including hiring gemologists to
Mhm.
help us authenticate the jewelry, then we will win. And technology, at least for now, is second. Technology became first later,
Yeah.
but technology is second. And they put a lot of money into technology and the platform, and they
Uh-huh.
didn't have the product was mediocre at best. They couldn't compete. And the difference when I'm getting really into the weeds here, but people that do self-posting sites, just say you had 5 items, you're going to put it on every site because who
Totally.
knows what's going to sell first.
Mhm.
Which
Mhm.
meant, I mean, the beauty of the RealReal is not only does the company do all the work, but the product on that site is exclusive. You will not find it anywhere else.
Yeah, that's what I've really liked about the process of selling on the RealReal. It's like seamless. It's the most hands-off process ever. Like when I
By design, by the
it's
way.
and it's as someone who's like selling luxury, that's what I want. And
Right,
like if I'm parting ways with something, then it's a high-end item. Someone else takes care of it.
right.
I don't want to then go decide, oh, I'm going to style it this way. Like, no.
It's a lot. Yes, we wanted to take away all the work so you could just make money.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
make it easy. I mean, again, so when I asked my friend Ann, way back when, who was shopping, I said, and she goes, why would I try to consign or do it myself? She goes, I don't want to drop it off in a brick and mortar
no.
store because it gets lost and I'll never get paid. And why would I do it myself? I don't have time for that. I'm
Yeah,
like, and she didn't say it, but I mean, the truth is, she didn't need the money.
exactly. Yeah.
But having said that, I don't care how much money you have. Everyone likes to monetize assets that are
Yeah,
just sitting
absolutely.
there.
Yeah, why would you not? It's
Right.
it's like smart to do it that way.
Of course. Of course. Anyway, so that's the beginning. A lot of like, no, no, no. And then it started working, but it was always hard. It was always
Yeah.
hard to raise money.
So then at what point do you realize that, oh my gosh, like I'm building a business that can be $1 billion
Oh no,
business?
what's funny? When I look back at my original plan,
Uh-huh.
the company went uh 10, 50, 100 million roughly. And
Wow.
I had the first 3 years
Uh-huh.
nailed.
Incredible.
So once you get there, then it's like, well, why not bigger?
Uh-huh.
And then you have to think differently because you have to put really good processes in place. You have to think about technology. You have to figure out how you scale.
And so then I guess like also when you're growing so fast, I'm guessing hiring is something that you have to focus.
Always.
How
Oh,
do you hire?
I spent so much time on that in the book.
Uh-huh.
And you're in the same state. So here's and I walk through like people that are better for a startup.
Mhm.
And here's what happens. At some point, look, Rati was the perfect first employee because she was a merchant. She was also an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
So she knew she had to do everything.
Mhm.
She had worked really hard to get her business where it was. So she couldn't sit back. She understood you did everything as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur or an employee. So she got it. Um, the second employee I hired was someone who was a great problem solver and could roll up her sleeves. So
Mm.
not necessarily she did so many jobs in the company and she had limited expertise in
Mhm.
all of them, but she knew how to solve problems.
Mhm.
So one time she ran customer service for a while and she was great because she had the right orientation toward the customer. She was a great problem solver. One time she ran ops, pick, pack, and ship.
Mhm.
So that person in your early stage that'll roll up their sleeves and get stuff done. And you
Mhm.
can say, can you just figure this out?
Mhm.
They're like, "Yeah, got it." You check with them later. "Got it. Here's what we're gonna do. What do you think?" You're like, "Great." Or you
Mhm.
say, "Oh, maybe think a little bit here." But someone that can just take stuff off your plate,
Mhm.
really important. What what becomes harder is when you need someone's expertise.
Mm.
And and that usually resides in a corporate person, not always.
Mhm.
Corporate people are not good in startups.
Mm.
There's a reason they're in a corporation.
Yeah.
And they're not good with risk, number one. Number two, their jobs, depending on how fast the company's growing, maybe they never experienced a high growth company before. I say this and it's true. I've never seen it not true, but I had to it's a bending thing. Startups bend toward a meritocracy,
Mm.
meaning that
Yeah.
every person matters and if they aren't accountable or they can't do their job, they don't last.
Yeah.
Either you have to fire them or they spin out because they're miserable. Corporations, corporate people bend toward playing politics.
Yep. You're so right.
And those people don't work in a startup. But at some point, you really want their thinking.
Uh-huh.
And that's where it becomes tricky when you're trying to get deeper expertise. So if you think about the real where it went, when I left it, getting in between 300,000 to 500,000 products a month
Wow.
and coming into multiple ops centers and three at the time. You need someone with great logistics, operations skill set. But if they bring in a fixed mindset,
Mm.
not a flexible, agile mindset, they're going to die because there wasn't a roadmap for what
Mhm.
they did at the Rail
Yeah.
because you don't know what's coming in until it comes in. You're not placing reorders. You're not putting, I'm going to put the toothpaste by the toothbrush because those things are the high moving items they sell. They're usually in the same bag together.
Uh-huh.
You can't do that. You have to use your skill set, but have an agility
Uh-huh.
factor built into your mindset so you can then adapt to the problem at hand. And that's where all the hiring issues came because you certainly don't want someone that plays politics. You want someone that is actually accountable, but they have to bring what they learned, but not rely on what they learned.
Mm.
And that's tricky.
I mean, it's
It's
like
so
it
tricky.
is because I mean, I think when someone's been molded by corporate culture, they're kind of stuck in their ways. And while they may have
Yes.
the expertise, it's also in a startup environment. I mean, being in it myself, like you have to be so adaptable. You have to be so nimble. You can't be so rigid. And yes, there's like, of course, ideals that startups want to get to in terms of organization and stuff. But at the early days, it's just like move as quickly as you possibly can.
Exactly. In fact, honestly, you have to be decisive.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
even if you're wrong, it's better than not being decisive.
Yeah, yeah,
That's another thing you have to and you know this, you operate with limited data.
yeah.
I mean, you do get data post. Hopefully you've set up to get
Mhm.
great data coming in, but you're really making decisions in gray areas
Totally.
all the time and from instinct, especially if you're doing something no one else has done before. And so hiring is always hard. And I would say um, it doesn't get easier because you're a little LA is sort of a different environment too because everyone has the side hustle down here. Um, but in the Bay Area, when you're looking at resumes, there's a lot of skill set inflation because they could have been at a company that did really well, but in fact, they could hide there. All right. It's a bigger company now and they can hide there. And in fact, they didn't really do that well.
Mm.
And they're not going to do well in your smaller startup. Or they could have been in a startup that failed and they're like, but I still did this and this and this. And in fact, they didn't. So And the other thing that's hard is no one gives references anymore because they're
Yeah.
afraid of getting sued. So then you have to back channel. So I would say do the best you can at hiring for a skill set that has experience but agility and they aren't rigid. And then get ready to fire fast because you know within 90 days if they're going to work in your environment. And if they,
Mhm.
and the other thing, which is really important, check their values. Um, Working hard and wanting to be part of something bigger than them to achieve that goal has to be something they're willing to do.
Mhm.
And integrity is really important.
Totally.
So really check values and make sure your values are aligned.
Mhm.
But it's always hard,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yet
hiring is
it's
tough.
so hard. But it's the most important thing
It
you
is.
can do
You're
because you
you're only
can't
as good as your
scale.
team.
Yeah, you can't scale
Yeah.
otherwise. Yes,
So at what point then did you decide that it was the right move for you to leave the RealReal? Because this is never easy as a founder,
I
right?
got fired,
Okay.
so I didn't decide. No, here I have a theory,
Uh-huh.
but it's not. This is my theory. So look, here's the Real World took in a lot of capital
Mhm.
and I mean, a lot of capital. I could add it up, but it's in the several $100 million worth of capital. My early stage investors, whenever you take in money from a venture capital firm, they tend to ask for a board seat.
Mhm.
And my all my investors until the very last one were took a board seat. Even the last one took a board seat. But they all got off the board to sell their stock because the company was public. I took it public in 2019.
Incredible.
You have SEC regulations. You can't sell stock if you're an insider unless you follow the insider trading, which doesn't necessarily give you optimal pricing.
Mhm.
It gets you can sell within a window and you get the price you get.
Mhm.
So the investors, all except for one guy, the last money and got off to sell their stock. Well, then COVID hit and the stock dropped. And it was a real struggle because the company isn't a self-posting site, meaning we had to go collect the goods. You couldn't collect the goods. We were trending 40 points. We were up versus year ago 40 points. When COVID hit, we were down 40 points. It was really stressful and
Mhm.
bad for the business. So at some point, the stock dropped. This guy never sold. He never got off the board. And my theory is, oh, wait, and my other board members were getting off the board, and I was replacing them, bad on me, with mostly corporate women who had no idea. It was just bad. I made recommendations. You don't really replace them, they have to go to a vote, but I
Mhm.
made recommendations for board members. Values were not aligned. Their experience set while they were deep in their area,
Mhm.
they really didn't understand the startup world
Mhm.
at all.
Mhm.
And so I had a new board, pretty much a completely new board with a guy who was disgruntled because his now, instead of selling when he could, his money was gone. In fact, had lost a lot of money and he was a PE guy. So my theory is he started working against me. And I had a new CFO, which I was excited about. And he said, you know what? There's these three people I think are working against you. He picked it up. I'm not political. He's like, and I remember thinking, I wonder if he's paranoid, because
Mhm.
I'm heads down working.
Totally.
So he was, I think he was right. It was probably led by the one PE guy that didn't get off. I didn't help myself because I told him to F off in a board meeting that he was lying. And then all the people are like, oh, you can't talk to a board member. I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, he's lying. He's completely lying.
Mhm.
And I just lost it
Mhm.
at the board meeting. And then it just sort of deteriorated after that. And 3 months later, they fired me.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then
So
they brought in a guy who was a friend who had worked for one of the board members in a company in the luxury space that filed bankruptcy and is now being bought by another company. And this guy had never been a CEO before, had never run a public company before because he wasn't a CEO. And anyway, he ended up getting terminated last October. And ta-da, Rati Levesque is now running the company, and she owns it. So
oh my
here's
gosh, I
the
love that, yeah.
oh, she's awesome. Here's the beauty of running a company that has that high growth. When someone is scalable and has a scalable mindset and just every challenge you give them, they just grow into it and their approach is so solid. and you keep giving them more, and all of a sudden they're doing more than they ever thought.
Uh-huh.
So Raji was an example of that. She just kept growing and learning, and she knew the business cold, and she has phenomenal, I call it phenomenal capacity,
Mhm.
phenomenal. She's a rock star. The company had about 4 or 5 of those, and the more you gave them, the more they did.
Wow.
And I kept the whole time, you keep thinking, I'm seeing more in them than they're seeing in themselves,
Mhm.
and they keep every time they have a challenge, they're stepping up and doing more. So people's lives get transformed in a really good company if
Mhm.
because there's more opportunity for them. But I saw it time and time again. People with who maybe had been in most of these people were in another job that was limiting.
Mhm.
Lim They didn't even know their limits
Yeah.
because they were doing so much phenomenal work as
Yeah.
the company scaled, and she's an example of that. So,
Wow.
anyway, it worked out, that, board's still there, that guy is still there. The stock went up to about 10 and then fell again, so it's either lower or about the same as when the lowest points when I was there, and, it makes so my learning from that, I'm never gonna learn how to play politics, it's not my personality, but, I recommended people on the board that did not have shared values, number 1. Number 2, I did give away my power when I told him to F off in a board meeting, and I knew it at the time, and I think all women have to realize that older women and men never like to see a woman lose their shit, even if she's right.
Wow.
Even if she's right, they can tolerate a man doing it, but with a woman, we get labeled
Crazy
whatever.
bitch.
Yeah, pretty much. So, keep that in mind. And one of my hot buttons, I don't have a lot, but one of them is if you lie to my face, I lose it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm basically the same way. I'm like, "How? How?
Oh no, I'm a
Why?"
lot louder than that
Yeah.
and a lot nastier. Especially because obviously, something was going on,
Yeah.
behind
Yeah.
my back, and the CFO, by the way, who was really good, also got fired. When the new guy came in, he's like, "I don't wanna work with you, and I don't think you're good," or whatever. I don't know what happened there, but
Uh-huh.
he ended up saying, "I don't wanna be here," and they said, "Great, we don't want you here if you don't wanna be here," and they fired him.
So then what happens? Like, what happens when you get fired? Like, how do you deal with that emotionally? Like, how I mean, you're like, that's like an
It
insane
was
thing to
like
go
a
through.
death. It's like a death, especially when
Yeah.
you start the
Exactly.
company
I can't
and
even imagine, like, if someone took a ray away from me, like, I think I would be, like, devastated.
so I'm not gonna lie. I mean, look, you took it from an idea in my kitchen to well over $1 billion, took it public, knew almost, when I left, it was about 3,300 employees, knew almost all of them. Um, we all went through COVID together, which was, I mean, we all did but as a company, that had another level of bonding and horror,
Totally,
but
yeah.
we'd all sort of come out of that. And so my first thing was shock, crying. Um, and then I went through a period, and I've always been one to exercise to get rid of my anxiety or my excess energy
Mhm.
just to keep life moving. I find it to be, really
It's
hard
therapeutic,
cardio,
yeah.
but really hard cardio. It's like you have to sweat.
Yeah.
None of the I mean, stretching's good. Lifting weights is really important, but I mean, I've always got to sweat.
Mhm.
So I would say for about 6 months, and then it dissipated, then it became old, but it took me about 6 months. I would get on either an elliptical or well, mostly an elliptical, and I would go and I would picture every board member with something horrific happening to them and get great satisfaction out of that.
That is so real.
I know. And then at some point it wasn't then it was like, "Okay, I'm done with that,"
Yeah,
because that's not where I wanna put my energy, but
totally.
I had to, in my mind,
Mhm.
inflict like, a doll with putting pins in their
Yeah,
psyche. I'm sure it didn't affect their psyche, but it was good for me. You know how
yeah.
people say you shouldn't do that? It's like, no, I needed to do that. I
Mhm.
needed in my mind to have horrific things happen to them. And to this day, if something terrible happened to them, I'd be fine. Who cares? And I'm a compassionate person,
Yeah.
but I'd be like, yeah, probably karma got him. I hope, but I don't think about it now. So
Mhm.
that became something that I didn't want to. It wasn't a good use of my energy and my
Totally.
time.
Yeah.
Um, but I'll tell you what, and it did happen. And I still use the RealReal. I still shop in the RealReal. I will never walk into another brick and mortar store again because I made the mistake of doing it. I had a ring where a beautiful ring I bought in the RealReal, and a stone had fallen out. And I walked in and I knew exactly where it needed to go. I knew who it needed to be sent to. So I walk into the store on Madison in New York City. No one knows who I am. No one knows that, and I'd only been gone 7 months. So think
Mhm.
about that. No one knew who I was. It shows you a lot of turnover, but still,
Wow.
when I gave them instructions on where the ring needed to go, they're like, well, that's not how it works. And I go, it is how it works there. And I didn't tell them I was the founder, but we sorted it out. The ring got taken care of. But when I walked out, I literally threw up in a bush. Because so I would say, but by then I'd stopped visualizing all of them in deep pain or
Mhm.
horrible,
Mhm.
like terrible things would happen. There used to be, can I tell you sort of a
Mhm.
funny story because it gave me a good visual. Remember, and I don't even know if it's still there but the National Enquirer used to have this thing. This is way back,
Mhm.
probably in the 80s.
Mhm.
When you look at it, and people were spontaneously combusting, and they'd have like just shoes with an ankle that was charred. Like this
Mhm.
person just spontaneously combusted, It
Mhm.
was like,
Mhm.
sure they did.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I would think, "God, wouldn't that be great if you could just look at them and they spontaneously combusted and they were just like charred ankles with their high heels or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
anyway. But so I would say just like any death, it's a process, but I also made a conscious decision I wasn't going to subject myself to people to going in and people not knowing who I was. And I didn't say, I didn't
Yeah, of
pull that
course.
card. And just the other day in New York, one of the real LMs was in my building and she was struggling with all of her white bags. Normally I would have helped them to the car and da 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 da. I just got on another elevator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you have to do what you have to do to, like, cope and, like, also kind of separate yourself from the
Now,
scenario.
having said that, I really want the company to do well.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy Rotzi's at the helm.
Yeah.
The other person, in my opinion,
Mhm.
was not qualified, and clearly they didn't last. And I think she is a rock star, and she understands the business, and she deserves it. She's worked really hard, and she has great capacity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope she does really well, and I want the company to do well. It would make me happy.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it's like at the end of the day, it's like your baby,
It
And
was my
so,
baby.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
can understand that. So tell everyone what your book. What can they expect from
Oh
it?
gosh. All right. So I wrote the book. If I would have read this book, I wouldn't have made mistakes that I made.
Wow.
And I haven't read that many. I read a lot of business books.
Uh-huh.
My favorite by far was Shoe Dog.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's so good.
Oh my
It's such a
gosh.
good book.
Such a good book. Even though, especially because you think you know the story of how
Yeah,
Nike got
it's so
started,
good.
and then you don't know, right? You're
Mhm.
like, and then at some point, like part of you is like, oh, they made it. But when you're reading, I'm like, are they gonna make it?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
it's beautifully written, beautiful story, and it felt honest and
Did.
real. So I wanted to write the journey of the rail year by year and how we got through everything, including I write about me getting fired. And I wanted it to be, and lessons are woven in, not sort of like when I learned them,
Yeah.
and lessons are woven in because I really hate those book or here are the 5 things you need
Yeah.
to learn. So it's a good book for someone who loves entrepreneurial stories.
Mhm.
There's a lot of key lessons. It's a fast read. There's some big bold-faced names in there because, the real did change the way people shop and
Mhm.
did sort of it did absolutely disrupt the fashion industry.
Definitely did, yeah.
So there's a lot of information about that. So I think people will find it to be hopefully inspirational.
Yeah.
The me getting fired, which is written in the book. Someone said, "Oh, that was so shocking the way you wrote it." Well, it was shocking when it happened, but that's like not on the grand scheme of things. That's like 1%.
Yeah.
The rest are key lessons, walking through it, telling the story. It's mostly fun. Hopefully, it's a little inspirational. And I think it's a practice woven in it is practical advice for people.
Well, I can't wait to read it. Julie, thank you so much for being here. Tell everyone where they can find you.
Oh, they can find me at, oh gosh, this is sort of long. Ready?
Yeah.
It's Julie, Julie, at shakiVC.com, which is SHAKTIVC.com. And I'm advisor to this fund. I'm not one of the people involved in the fund, but I'm an advisor. And it's a great early stage fund.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.